Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. My name is David Nates, and today I wanted to focus on my top 5 favorite Van Damme movies from the 90s. This is the second part video in a 4-part series focusing on Van Damme's career split between decades. The 90s was definitely the decade that made Jean-Claude rise from a low-budget B-list actor to much bigger films being produced by big studios such as Universal Pictures. He even had a cool guest starring role on a double episode of the highly popular series of the 90s, Friends, where he plays a sort of exaggerated version of himself in which he starts dating Rachel and makes Monica jealous in the process. If you haven't seen this double episode, I highly recommend watching it. After the success of his early low-budget films, creating millions of dollars at the box office, Jean-Claude was slowly getting offered bigger and bigger budgeted movies. For example, his 1989 film Kickboxer had a small $3 million budget and returned $50 million at the box office. Such returns are pretty similar to what Blumhouse Productions is doing nowadays by producing many low-budget horror films. It's a formula of the small budget movie that will appeal to a large audience and create big returns at the box office. In the 80s, Canon Pictures was the king of low-budget action flicks, and with Van Damme's successful box office returns, it was inevitable that he made many movies with them. By 1989, Jean-Claude Van Damme had many box office hits under his belt, and that's when he started working for a much bigger production company. The first movie that I'd like to speak about is the 1990 movie entitled Lionheart, which is also known in some countries as Wrong Bet. Produced by Universal Pictures, this movie was directed by Sheldon Lettich, who was the writer of the original Bloodsport. This is actually his feature film directorial debut and was majorly successful upon its release. Sheldon and Jean-Claude ended up making a bunch of other movies together throughout the years. The movie Lionheart follows the story of a French Legionnaire named Lyon, who deserts his post to return to Los Angeles after hearing about his brother being burnt alive. The whole premise of the movie is that Lyon wants to take care of his brother's wife and child financially. Once back in Los Angeles, JCVD gets involved in the world of underground fighting, which enables him to make a lot of money quickly. He is urgently trying to come up with a lot of cash because he knows that being a deserter has made him a target for being incarcerated. Knowing that he doesn't have a lot of time makes it important for him to ensure his brother's family's financial future. It's true that when you explain the movie on paper, it actually doesn't make too much sense. Even though he's a deserter, it seems very unlikely that he's so important that the Legion would send some men to follow him in order to bring him back to get judged. But even despite the unlikely possibility of such a story actually really happening, the movie has a lot of heart to it. It actually shows Jean-Claude's ability to act and proposes to the audience a character that is deeper than any of his previous movies of the time. Lionheart also has a pretty cool cast of fighters and characters, including once again Michel Kissy, who portrayed Tong Po in Kickboxer. In this movie, he is one of the Legionnaires hired to bring back JCVD. Then the final bad guy of the movie, Attila, is played by Abdel Kissy, who is the real-life brother of Michel Kissy. It's actually pretty amazing how Van Damme was able to pull some strings and hire a bunch of his friends to be major characters in a Universal picture. It does prove that knowing the right people can make a difference. Either way, Lionheart is one of those must-see action films that manages to blend enough of a story, good action sequences, and some heartwarming moments. It's not a perfect film by any stretch, but definitely worth a watch. The second movie that I'd like to speak about is the 1991 film Double Impact, written and directed by Sheldon Lettich. This is yet another collaboration between JCVD and Lettich, and also the second time where Jean-Claude gets to fight his arch-nemesis Bolo Yeung, who was the lead bad guy in Bloodsport. Yeung is most known in the martial arts world for having played the bad guy in Enter the Dragon alongside Bruce Lee. What I love about him as a character is the fact that he has such an enormous presence, yet remains a man of very few words. His bodybuilder physique and stern look is what makes him the perfect bad guy. No wonder that he's managed to build a career on being an antagonist. Double Impact tells the story of Chad and Alex, a pair of twins, who have been separated at a very young age following an accident where their parents were assassinated by the Chinese triad. Alex is saved by one of the maids and is left at a Hong Kong orphanage, whereas Frank, the bodyguard of the family, flees to France and raises Chad there. After all, they needed to find a reason to justify Van Damme's French accent, although it is kind of strange that both brothers have the same exact accent, having grown on different continents. 25 years later, Chad and Frank, the former bodyguard, are running a successful fitness studio in Los Angeles. Frank reveals that he wants to go to Hong Kong for a new business venture. Once there, Frank figures out a way for the long-lost twins to meet up and tells them the whole story about their separation, that he needs their help in order to kill Griffith, who murdered their parents, and claim the money that was their family's in the first place. This leads JCVD and his twin on a bunch of action-packed adventures throughout Hong Kong to a final confrontation in a large boat docked at a Hong Kong port. Once again, this isn't a very complicated movie and sometimes requires its spectators to not really think about the story as plausible or not. Double Impact presents a couple of cool scenes where Van Damme has dialogue scenes with his brother, including a pretty creative fight scene between the two of them. This movie shows once again that Van Damme can actually act and has enough cheese mixed with his martial arts and fun to hold the audience's attention for the duration of the movie. One of my favorite lines of the movie is, "With my big legs in karate, I can do the splits no problem." It's again that combination of bright 80s colors, tights, and cheesy lines that made a lot of these movies enjoyable. Again, the 80s and 90s era of filmmaking wasn't doing all this on purpose, and that's why it works. This movie is a must for all Van Damme fans. The third movie that I'd like to speak about is the 1992 movie Universal Soldier, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren. This is in some ways Van Damme's version of The Terminator, and probably one of the best looking movies that he has been in. This movie features explosions, fights in the rain, high-speed pursuits, big action sequences, and various beautiful locations featuring the iconic desert landscapes of America. The budget for this movie was $23 million. It made $80 million at the box office. I'm pretty darn sure that through its VHS, DVD, Blu-ray releases, this movie must have made the initial budget many times over. This movie was so successful that it spawned 2 direct-to-TV movies which didn't feature Van Damme or Lundgren and were mediocre at best. A proper sequel to the original film was made in 1999 starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. The sequel, well, it wasn't the best. Even though it had some pretty cool fight scenes and featured a very agile Michael Jai White, it was released in movie theaters in some countries but was mostly released as a straight-to-DVD film. In 2009 and 2012, 2 more sequels were made, both starring Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren. The 2012 sequel featured Scott Adkins as the actual protagonist. Out of all the sequels, TV spin-offs, I'd say that the only one that is truly worth watching is the first one. It had a pleasant and touching story, featured good cinematography, and it was just fun. The movie Universal Soldier tells the story of Luc Devereaux, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, and Sergeant Andrew Scott, played by Dolph Lundgren, who are both soldiers in the Vietnam War. Sergeant Andrew Scott goes insane and Luc Devereaux confronts him, leading to a confrontation that leads to both their deaths. Luke and Andrew are cryogenically frozen and classified as missing in action. Decades later, their bodies are reanimated to become part of a secret operation called the Universal Soldiers, which is meant to create perfect soldiers with superhuman powers and willing to take on any orders. In order to achieve this, all Universal Soldiers have had their memories erased. Strangely, Luke and Andrew start to remember the tragic events leading to their death, which in turn makes Andrew become crazy again. Luke attempts to stop him in a similar way to the flashback scene in the beginning of the movie. Things escalate when Andrew takes a reporter for hostage. In turn, Luc Devereaux tries to protect her, and by doing so, he starts a high-speed pursuit. All these events lead to a big chunk of the movie where Luke and the reporter are running away from the military, trying to recover both Universal Soldiers, and Andrew pursuing them ferociously in order to kill them. This movie is very well staged and does a good job going into the psychology of war, mixed with some light comedic moments and over-the-top action. As mentioned, I feel sometimes like this movie resembles somewhat Terminator 2. Definitely Universal Soldier is a movie that any action fan should watch. Van Damme and Lundgren at their best, both physically and acting-wise, doing what they do best. The fourth movie that I like to speak about is Hard Target, which was filmed in 1993 and directed by none other than John Woo. This was Woo's first time directing an American film. If you don't know who he is, well, John Woo is a Hong Kong film director, producer, and screenwriter. He is considered a major influence in the action genre. known for over-the-top fight sequences, Mexican standoffs, and the frequent use of slow motion throughout his scenes. A very typical shot for Woo is the use of slow motion mixed in with birds flying off in the distance as the action star walks through them. Some of his most notable HK films are A Better Tomorrow, The Killer, Hard Boiled, followed by a bunch of American hits such as Mission Impossible 2, Face Off, and Broken Arrow, just to name a few. This was actually the first major Hollywood film made by a Chinese director. Because Universal Pictures was so nervous about Woo directing this feature, they sent in Sam Raimi to look over the film's production. Initially, Woo wasn't very interested in making a martial arts movie, but because Van Damme was cast in it, he upped the action sequences in order to make the movie more of a martial arts epic. The movie's initial release was heavily edited because of its R rating. It was also very much criticized, but over the years has become a cult film among fans for its action sequences. Hard Target tells the story of Chance Boudreaux, an out-of-work Cajun United States Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance veteran. He saves the life of Natasha Binder, who is searching for her missing father. Upon being saved, she hires Van Damme to help her find her dad. Through research, they find out that her dad was distributing flyers for a shady recruiter named Randall Poe. This leads them to discovering that a wealthy man named Émile Fouchon is hunting homeless former soldiers for sport. After finding that he is being investigated by Chance and Natasha, Fouchon sends his gang led by Pic Van Cleef to ambush them. This is another one of Van Damme's films that is very enjoyable to watch, not just for the action, but also for its action-packed story. It does help too that John Woo has a very specific aesthetic to filming, as a lot of the martial arts sequences offer some really artsy camera angles and very good use of slow motion. If you're an action fan who likes to see a hero in a mullet kicking ass, grabbing snakes with his bare hands, doing jumping split kicks and fighting inside of a burning building, this is definitely a movie for you. The fifth movie that I'd like to speak about is the 1994 movie Time Cop. This movie was directed by Peter Hyams, who ended up directing two other Van Damme films, Sudden Death and Enemies Closer. This film is based on a three-part comic book of the same name, featured in an anthology book published by Dark Horse Comics. Time Cop, the movie, tells the story of Max Walker, a depressive police officer living in 2004, who is part of the Time Enforcement Agency. The reason he's so sad is because his wife was murdered back in 1994. Being part of this time enforcement agency, he often needs to travel back in time to apprehend criminals who are misusing time travel in order to benefit themselves. During a sting operation back in 1929, the criminal that he is about to arrest admits to working with Senator McComb, who is actually running for president in Walker's current time period. He admits to the fact that he was sent into the past in order to illegally take advantage of the stock market in order to help fund McComb's campaign. Upon his return in 2004, Walker is assigned a new partner named Sarah Fielding. They are quickly assigned a new mission to investigate Senator McComb back in 1994. Once there, things turn south, and his partner betrays him as he finds out that she's working for McComb. A shootout ensues, and Walker manages to escape. Whilst in the past, he finds out that his wife, who is still in 1994, was actually pregnant, and that she is the target of McComb. Walker does everything in his power to stop the assailants in the hopes of altering the future and also stopping McComb from being the evil person that he is. Critics had very mixed reviews upon its release, but it did average over 100 million worldwide. Personally, I've always loved time travel, so when you mix time travel, JCVD, and martial arts, I'm all for it. This is once again from an era of Van Damme's filmmaking history where each film that he made had a bigger budget and bigger returns. This is a legitimate Hollywood picture. The sets, the actors, the explosions really show a level of production that didn't exist in his older 80s movies. There are a couple of other Van Damme movies from the 90s that are actually worth mentioning too. Some of the most notable ones are The Quest and Double Team, but this is a top 5 from the 90s. In the follow-up to this video, I will focus on his top 5 films from the 2000s, and in the fourth video, I'll focus on his top films from the last decade. Obviously, if these Van Damme videos are successful, I'd be glad to review the second half of his best movies from the 90s. Please be sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Let me know in the comments what you think and maybe even a best moment from one of these films. If you have any interesting stories about your first experience seeing any of his movies, well, please write about it in the comments section. I'm always down for a JCVD story. Have a Van Damme good day, and I'll see you in the next video.